Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my April 2017 wrap-up and my May TBR. I had a very hectic April, but instead of explaining to you all the ways that it was crazy, I thought I would actually just start talking about the books I read because a lot of them are reflective of the type of month I had. That will make sense once I start talking about the books. Also, can you hear me or is my shirt too loud? The first book that I finished in April might actually be my top book of 2017. Only time will tell. That book is Margaret by Danielle Dutton. This is historical fiction set in the 17th century that focuses on real-life historical figure Margaret Cavendish, who was the first woman in England who wrote to publish. Given that she was a writer, she had many thoughts that she wanted to share with the outside world. And this very short novel is an imagining of what her thoughts might have been as she went through her very interesting life. Danielle Dutton in this novel has, in my opinion at least, successfully attempted to get inside of Margaret Cavendish's head. We can never know how successful of an attempt it was, but Danielle Dutton imagines Margaret Cavendish to be a simultaneously introverted but fame-seeking individual. She imagines that Margaret Cavendish wrote to help people get inside of her head and help people understand her better. But in reality, Margaret Cavendish's writing did as much to alienate her as it did to gain her notoriety. It was probably clear from the way that I introduced to this book, but I absolutely adored it. Danielle Dutton's writing had the ability to convey Margaret's personality and her emotion in so few words. I'd be reading a sentence and could feel how Margaret must be feeling about it without the author having to spell out anything at all. That's talent. I love this book so much that I bought my own copy when I previously had it out from the library. It is a gorgeous physical copy. Not only do you have the art on the front, the art continues onto the French flaps, which then open up to match the shirt I'm wearing. The art also continues onto the spine and onto the back. I just love it as a physical object. And in fact, I love this book so much that I got a short passage from it tattooed on my shoulder at the beginning of the month. I did a whole video where I talked about the experience of getting the tattoo, the meaning behind the tattoo. I will link that video down in the description box if you would like to see it. The next book I finished in April was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This was actually a reread for me. I read this one when I believe I was a freshman in high school, and I remember really enjoying it. Not necessarily loving it, but really enjoying it. So I wanted to reread it now that I read more classics and see if I was able to get any more out of it than I did when I was 15. It turns out I ended up feeling almost exactly the same way about it as I did the first time I read it. The premise of this classic is that there is a young boy named Pip who is being raised by his much older sister and her husband after the premature death of his parents. Pip is all set up to become an apprentice to his brother-in-law, who is a blacksmith, until one day he is surprised to learn that he has a secret benefactor who is going to pay for him to become educated and to become a gentleman. Pip feels sure that the mystery person with very deep pockets is the tragic spinstress whose house he used to play at when he was a child. Her name is Miss Havisham. Pip used to play at her house with her young ward, Estella. Pip had fallen for Estella immediately when he went over to Miss Havisham's, even though Estella was literally raised to be a heartbreaker by Miss Havisham. But since Pip is very poor, he believes that Miss Havisham is paying for him to become a gentleman so as to deserve to be with Estella in the end. I absolutely love the premise of this book. I have had it stuck in my head for over 10 years now. But here's the thing. This book has a hugely strong start and then abruptly gets boring in the middle, and then takes forever to conclude. Although I ended up feeling nearly the same way as I did the first time I read it, I think I definitely understood more this go around. The most notable difference between the first time I read it and this read through was the amount of sympathy I felt for Pip. When he is a young boy, he is basically called worthless every single day by nearly everyone in his life. His sister and all of his sister's friends are constantly telling him how lucky he is to be getting raised by hand, even though his sister's temper is out of control and she is physically violent. Naturally, given that he is extremely unhappy, he wants to escape this life. He learns to resent this life. He wants to achieve better things. He wants to move on. But when he finally has the opportunity to do that, he spends the other half of his life beating himself up that he dared want more. My heart absolutely broke for him the entire way through this novel. I don't think I will ever get the premise of this book out of my brain. I do think it will stick with me forever. But I can't say I ever see myself wanting to reread this again. The next book I finished in April was Travel as a Political Act by Rick Steves. I had seen this book a while ago on Goodreads, added it to my to-read shelf, and was saving it for a time where I would be traveling. Given that I went to Boston this month, I thought this would be great to take along with me. If you'd like to see the vlog I did when I was in Boston, I will also link that down in the description box below. I had actually never heard of the Rick Steves travel programming before. I was just very taken in by this title. And it turned out that it was a good thing that I was, because Rick Steves, just as I do, believes that travel is immensely important for expanding one's worldview. As the title would imply, Rick Steves argues in this book that travel is a political act. When we as citizens go abroad, we learn from people in other countries, people from other cultures. We bring this knowledge home with us and use that to be more informed citizens of the world. We use that knowledge that we gain from others to confront our own worldview. Think about whether or not we could be doing things differently. We also share these experiences with others and encourage them to do the same. Steves illustrates this point by talking about his own experiences traveling to different parts of the world. For example, he has a whole chapter that talks about his time spent in the former Yugoslavia. He talks a lot about Europe. That's a particular area of interest for him. He even talks about his time spent in Iran. The chapter on Iran is the last chapter in this book, and that was by far the most interesting chapter. And there was one section of it that absolutely blew me away. This section was about a revelation that Rick Steves had during a car ride with one of his guides for the trip. Rick and his guide, who was an Iranian man, were stuck in traffic, just sitting there. All of a sudden, the guide yells, "Death to traffic!" Rick was taken aback. He said, "Don't you mean death to America? That's the controversial phrase that tons of international relations policy has been based off of for God knows how many years." And his guide explained to him that death to, insert noun here, is just a figure of speech that Iranians use to express frustration. Rick compared it to how we Westerners would say, "Oh, damn those teenagers." You don't actually want to damn them to hell. You just want them to turn the music down. So the idea that Iranians want all Americans to die is at least partly based on a cultural misconception. This goes to show just how much a tiny misconception can hugely impact international politics. And it clearly shows just how much perspective travel can provide. I really enjoyed this book. Every single chapter had something very enlightening to learn about. And there was a certain pleasure to be had by reading this on an airplane. And the very last book that I'd like to talk to you about is Being Mortal, Medicine and What Matters in the End by Atul Gawande. This was not a book that I had originally planned on picking up this month. Without getting too personal and discussing private matters, I lost someone in my family this month. It was not necessarily unexpected, but it did happen very quickly. I was not hugely close to this person. I'm not going to pretend that I was, but this person had been an active part of my life for 15 years. I have been lucky enough in my life so far to not have lost anyone by them dying, And so when this happened, I didn't really know how to handle it. Normally when I'm in a situation where I don't know how to handle it, I turn to books to help me. This was a book that I had received in a Book Riot quarterly box back when they used to do that. I knew when I first opened that package and saw this book inside that there would come a time where I would need this book. And that time came this April. This is a book by the surgeon Atul Gawande, whose other book, The Checklist Manifesto, I read earlier this year. And in this book, he discusses his experiences with death, both professionally, as a medical professional, and personally. He discusses how modern Western society is further and further removed from death and discussions about death with the extreme, overwhelming advances in healthcare. We don't really talk about death much anymore. It's not such an active part of our lives since people are living longer and longer. But that really becomes a problem when, not if, we need to have those conversations. Because this is something that will affect all of us. He discusses in this book the devolvement of the intergenerational family living situation, where children stay living with their parents their whole lives. While this has proved extremely helpful for economic growth, it has proved very problematic when you're discussing what happens to older people when they need someone to care for them. This conversation then moves into a discussion on nursing homes and assisted living facilities. But most movingly, at the end of this book, he discusses end-of-life care and ponders which is most important, fighting for survival or ensuring a comfortable end. Not only does he discuss the real-life examples from his patients and patients of friends of his, but he gives his own personal situation of when this happened to his own father. It was highly emotional, but extremely moving and thought-provoking. I really believe that everyone needs to read this book. It made me see how important having the hard discussion with your loved ones about what you want for yourself at the end of your life. But I would suggest that you have better timing than I did, because as soon as I finished this book, I was so motivated that I came home and insisted that me and my husband have a conversation he was not ready to have. Welcome home from work, honey. Have a seat. We're going to talk about my death. Don't be like me. Choose your timing better. Also, read this book. So as you can probably tell from the books I chose, it was a very busy, at times very difficult month, so I did not get to all the reading that I wanted to do. I was mainly just caught up in doing many other things and didn't have the motivation to get to all the books that I wanted to. But because I don't want to give up on any of the books that I had planned on reading back in April, I'm just going to push most of them to the month of May. So I am nearly done with The Lily Theater by Lulu Wang. I think I will be finishing this up in the next day or so. And also, I swear to God, I'm going to finish Peter the Great by Derek Wilson. I'm going to motivate myself to finish it so I can finally do the Russian History Retreat on him, so that I can move on to Catherine the Great by Simon Dixon and also do the Russian History Retreat on her. I have Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs on my e-reader all ready to go. Another book that I am pushing to May is The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan. The very last book in this series just came out at the end of last month, and everyone is really excited about it on social media and makes me super excited to pick up this book, even though it's only the second in the series. I'll be reading the random book that I picked off of my TBR for last month, which is The Glorious Heresies by Lisa Mcinerney. I'm actually listening to this one on audio right now. Those were all the books that I pushed from April's TBR right on over to May's TBR, but I will be adding 2 books, the first of which is The Big Green Tent by Ludmila Ulitskaya. And the very last book on my May TBR will be The Random Choice from my To Reads shelf on Goodreads. If you've not seen me do this in a previous video, what I do is pick 3 random books off of my Goodreads To Read shelf and pick one of those options to read during the month. Option 1 is one I actually already have on my shelf. That's The Yid by Paul Goldberg. Option number 2 is The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. And option number 3 is A Reunion of Ghosts by Judith Clare Mitchell. Option number 3, A Reunion of Ghosts, is the one that's appealing to me the most right now. So that will be my random pick for the month. So those were all the books that I managed to get finished in April, what I am currently reading and what I am planning on reading for May. If you've heard any of these books, want to read any of them, or now want to read them now that you've heard me talk about them, I'd love to hear it down in the comment section below. Or if you'd like to talk to me anywhere else on social media, I have a variety of different profiles all over the internet, and the links to all of them are in the description box below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful May so far, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.